But this book here is the most interesting and factual of all of them. And I think our library may even have this book. If they don't, they can probably get it. But it is well worth reading if you have an interest in the Johnson County War. So anyway.
Will you say the title again, because I didn't have a camera?
It's Alias Frank Kent.
Thank you.
And the reason it says alias, you'll find out right away. Because Frank Kent wasn't his real name, but I'll let you go into that one here.
And another announcement, for those of you who haven't seen the movie Nebraska, Trash is in the movie.
Oh, you're kidding.
They filmed down at the lake stop, and he's one of the people at the bar talking next to Bruce Stern. Saw it yesterday.
Then we will go down in history for sure.
There you go.
Is he in the credits?
I didn't see him in the credits, no.
Well, we're going to talk today, the name of this thing, I didn't pick this name, postcard from the past, but it's a pretty good name because we don't have a projector, but when you get a chance, I laid out a lot of the postcards up here that were made from Lou Larsen photos. And some of them are blown up, and I got a picture of his cabin. His home, he had 2 homesteads. His first one was up South Piney Canyon, as far as you can go up South Piney Canyon, right up to the Forest Service. And that cave up in South Piney Canyon is referred to now as the South Piney Cave, but there's another name for it. But the original name for it was Larsen's Cave, and because he owned the adjoining property, and he was a mountain man. Vic Garber was telling me earlier they found some of his old caches up the mountain above Redgrave there, and I'm going to read you some stuff here. I'm going to read you a biography written by his daughter, and it mentions that quite a bit. He's a very interesting fellow. I'll give you a couple little facts on him here. He was born in 1883 in Omaha, Nebraska. He died in 1942, buried in Sheridan, Wyoming. He married a woman named Luella Harney in 1914 in Sheridan, and they lived in Story for quite a few years. And then he moved around a little, but he lived in Story. The earliest I can find him in Story is 1907. But he could have easily been here before that. I find him here again in 1912, 1916. His 1918 draft registration, however, shows he was the caretaker of Bighorn Reservoir for the home ranch, and he lived there in the January 1920 census. He was the caretaker there for a few years. In fact, his daughter was born there while they were snowed in for the winter, and it's in this biography a little bit about that. He also lived in Sheridan for a number of years. He was a blacksmith for the railroad, CB&Q Railroad in Sheridan. Him and his wife did divorce, and we're going to go into that, and then she carries on a little bit more history here in Story because she married Bert Staples, who had the main dude ranch in Story. So anyway, I'm going to read these biographies now. The first one is Louis Nord Larsen. It was written by his daughter, and it says, Louis Larsen was born in Omaha, Nebraska, July 4th, 1883. The youngest of a family of 2 boys and 5 girls. His parents were immigrants from Denmark who continued the Danish success at dairy farming on what was in the outskirts of town. Humane consideration for the cows was the rule. No hazing by dogs, no loud or angry voices at milking time. Instead, Dad Larsen could be heard singing little Danish songs to the cows as he milked them. This soothed the cows and increased the flow of milk and profits. Customers for the product encompassed a potpourri of nationalities. And in his role as a delivery person, Lou absorbed the inflections of various dialects so that he could accurately reproduce them in later years as an entertainer. The boy had little taste for learning the intricacies of dairy farming, however. He was more interested in studying the characteristics of the currents of the Missouri River, which flowed past their farm. Its powerful undertow made it an extremely dangerous and often fatal area for swimming. From his careful study of the river, Lou was able to challenge the treacherous currents and survive. As a young boy, he was given possession of a violin, which had been in the family over 200 years. Without any formal training, he mastered the instrument so well that his repertoire included classical and folk music. Other stringed instruments also claimed his attention. Anyone who heard his rendition of the Ben-Hur chariot race on the mandolin or the Spanish fandango on the guitar would attest to his skill. Now, I have seen references other places that he did play in all the local bands around here. He was quite active as a musician. And let's see here. And of course, practice to him was not a chore. It was more like a refuge. He would shut his eyes to close out the world and lose himself in the instrument. Very early, he combined his fascination with rivers and his musical ability. Possibly he was influenced by Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn, as he built a raft and loaded his instruments on it and floated off to explore the river system to the Gulf of Mexico. He cherished fond memories of the times he would pull into shore to camp for the night, and a farm owner would come down initially to order him off the property, but seeing the instruments, he would ask the lad if he could play any of them. With an affirmative answer, the boy would be invited to the house, neighbors would be called, and all would enjoy an evening of music and dancing. Lou chuckled at the memories of concerned farm women worrying about the poor little lonesome boy all alone in the great river. They'd load his raft up with all manner of good cooking, to the point where they'd almost sink it. And the drudgery of dairy farming was not for him. Wanderlust took him westward. He had learned that if he carried a musical instrument, that would ensure him a bed at every town he came to and possible funds for further travel. So he came to Wyoming, where the Bighorn Mountains claimed him, in what was to be a lifelong exploration of lofty peaks, scenic lakes, and wild rivers. A small cabin on a homestead in South Piney Canyon provided a base between excursion into the mountains or between musical pilgrimages. Visible in the photo of the Piney Vale homestead, which is one of those big ones I've got blown up, is a tall granite outcropping. And thereon hangs a tale evidencing clearly the ingenuity of the early pioneer. On hot summer days, he would place a large tub on it, fill it with water, leave it for the sun to heat. Then in a few hours, all he had to do was unclamp the hose, take a bath. And by this time, other hobbies enriched his life. His love of fishing motivated him to create artificial flies from bits of hair, fur, and feathers. Hunting developed him into a crack shot and led him to gun collecting, a collection which came to include many makes and models, including a gun which had belonged to Abraham Lincoln. He also operated a shooting gallery and store. His love of outdoors provided a desire to preserve and print the more treasured vistas of his mountains. Photography provided the means. His natural artist's eye gave delicate composition and balance to his works, so much so that the postcards he printed for sale were popular items in gift shops, and the ones he enlarged represent the best in nature photography. His first marriage ended in divorce because, unknown to him, his bride was epileptic, and the bruises she developed from seizures caused him to be suspected of abusing her. The second person to lay claim to his heart and his name was a diminutive brown-eyed beauty in Sheridan named Luella Jane Horney. They set up housekeeping in Sheridan, and after the birth of their son, the lure of the mountains claimed him. He took employment as a caretaker for the Bighorn Reservoir. Lou, his wife, and infant son moved into a little house on the shores of the lake, and the birth of a daughter made them a foursome. Necessity for schooling for the children occasioned their leaving this home. They bought a house in Sheridan, and Lou went to work for the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad as a blacksmith. Part of his job involved operating a large one-ton steam hammer, and he became so adroit at the control of this that he could crack a walnut without breaking and bruising the meat. He also developed skill at case-hardening steel, and he fashioned hunting knives, deer horn handles, and was quite adept at that. And his formal schooling ended at the 5th grade, but he read and loved the classics: Shakespeare, Clemens, Hawthorne, Emerson. He was particularly fond of James F. Cooper's Leather Stocking Tales. He also had a working knowledge of mathematics, including calculus. A flaw that dogged him all his life, however, was his reluctance to pay a bill. and this often caught up with him and forced him to sell treasured possessions like the Piney Vale homestead. And it doesn't say when he sold that, and I have never been to town to look it up, so I don't know when he sold the property of South Pine. It's also one of the reasons for the breakup of his marriage to Luella. After his children left home, he rented out the house in Sheridan, reserving one room for himself, and spent most of his time in the mountains. A small cabin situated on a homestead near Little Goose Peak provided a shelter. From it, he could look out over the valley to the lights of Sheridan. Now, Vic Garber was telling me that him and his brother found several of the caches that Lou had around the mountains up there. And he found one in the 50s anyway, Vic, right? Yeah, and so this guy, he was a mountain man. He went to the mountains. He stayed there most of the time. Came to town very seldom. And his pictures, as you can tell, he loved climbing trees. And most of those pictures are taken out of treetops. And let's see. Now he had the small cabin near Little Goose Peak, and from it he could look out over the valley of the lights of Sheridan. A short walk would bring him to the edge of Little Goose Canyon, where bald eagles guarded their nest. His neighbors were the forest creatures: deer, elk, moose, bear, coyote, wolves. From the cabin, he often had a ringside seat to contest between the trophy bull elk. Cancer got him a little later on, though, and cancer tightened its grip on him, reducing his 6'2" frame from 225 pounds to less than 100 when he died. He returned no more to the woods he left. Surely if he'd had his way, he would have found his final resting place in their shade. He rests in the cemetery in Sheridan. He's just barely inside the gate. His headstone's a rock of granite, like the core of the mountains he loved. Now that's a lot of information there, and we got to thank his daughter, because otherwise we wouldn't know very much about Lou Larsen at all. He was a little too reclusive. Now I'm going to read you a little bit on his wife Luella, and kind of an interesting little story here too that the daughter wrote on her also. Luella Horney was born in 1898 in Huntsville, Illinois, so she was quite a bit younger than Lou. And let's see, while the family was living in Sheridan, Wyoming, Luella met and married Lou Larsen. After the birth of their son Boyd, the Larsens moved to the mountains. The cabin at the Bighorn Reservoir was Spartan, to say the least. In winter, he was supplied by a wood range. Since winter at that altitude was often 9 months, Luella learned to walk on snowshoes. She developed and serviced her own trap lines separate from her husband. During World War I, there was concern that the Germans might try to sabotage the dam. Luella was deputized to protect it. No problems developed, but if there had been any person seeking to destroy it, he would have been confronted by a 98-pound sharpshooter. And her childhood experiences handling horses gave her confidence to take on the job of freighting into the mountains with a 4-horse team. The route was up the Red Grade. At that time, this was a narrow road that wound along the side of the mountains. Only a few places were wide enough for wagons to pass each other. Especially in winter, the way was steep and slick. There were times when 3 or 4 horses would slip to their knees, leaving one to dig its feet into the bank and hold the load until Luella climbed down off the wagon, straighten the harness, and calm the frightened horses. And carpentry came easy to this versatile woman. She often needed to instruct newcomers in the art of installing windows in a log cabin. Luella was presented with a special challenge in the little cabin on the shore of Bighorn Reservoir. The child she was carrying decided that 6.5 months was long enough to wait to be born. So in November, with snow piled to the eaves, a tiny newcomer joined the family. She was so small she could wear Luella's wedding ring for a bracelet. Her feet measured less than 1 inch long in a shoebox lined with cotton cloth, and placed on the water reservoir at the end of the wood range was her incubator. Further complications developed because the baby was unable to assimilate Luella's milk. The doctor at the other end of the county line opined that since the child could not possibly live anyway, it was best to stop trying to feed her. Lou was unwilling to accept defeat. He concocted a mixture of canned milk, water, honey, and whiskey, And the baby nursed from the business end of a medicine dropper and beat the odds. This probably qualifies her in the record book as the world's youngest and smallest lush. Now, this is the woman that wrote this story. She's talking about herself. But she goes on to say, suffice it to say, having depended on alcohol for life as a baby, the adults saw no reason to pursue it later. And after the family moved to Sheridan, Luella augmented the income by doing custom sewing. She also learned the art of cutting and doing some of the hair. At that time, she was occupied teaching immigrants to pass the test for citizenship. Divorce ended her stormy marriage. Luella then supported herself by working as a domestic in several homes around Sheridan. She learned to be a gourmet cook, and she took care of a lot of sick people and other nursing duties. She was persuaded to move to Staples Ranch by the fact that Bert had a 2-year-old daughter who needed a mother. Subsequently, she and Bert were married. She turned her considerable energies to helping pay off the ranch indebtedness. Such help included driving equipment to harvest, grain and hay, milking cows, training and shooting horses, outfitting and guiding pack trains. She could tie a diamond hitch with the best of them. She learned to feed logs into the mill that provided the lumber for use around the ranch, and the dinners that were served at the lodge under her supervision were noteworthy enough to be listed in a nationally distributed book on places that serve fine food. One particularly hard winter, she distinguished herself by donning snowshoes and carrying food to snowbound neighbors. Bert's long bout with cancer forced her into the dual responsibility of caring for him and running the ranch. After his death in 1957, she found the latter tax too much, and she sold out and moved to Oregon to be near her daughter. Now, she died in 1997. She was in her around 90 years old, her daughter. The mother lived to be 99, Luella. Now I'm going to read a little bit about Bert Staples. And I don't know, most of you probably heard of this Staples Dude Ranch, but it's up, if you go up North Piney to the corner of Lock Street, it lays to the west of Lock Street and the south of North Piney Road. One of probably the biggest dude ranch getting the V-Lays here in Stories. And this was Herbert Staples, was born September 4th, 1884 in Olean, Iowa. His family had farmed in that area for 3 generations. He graduated from high school there. And as a boy, he chose the harp as his musical instrument, and he was called upon to provide music for dancers. Later, he moved to Chicago, where he drove a cab. And then with the advent of the horseless carriage, he became interested in internal combustion engines. Another mechanic with whom he became friends suggested they combine their talents and build a motor to give Henry Ford some competition. Bert declined and headed west instead. The other mechanic was Walter Chrysler. So Bert bought Garrett Hoagland's homestead and began developing what became the Staples Guest Ranch. Financial considerations caused him to sell cabin sites on the property. They were located so that they would have minimum impact on the ranch atmosphere. An attractive tourist from Omaha caught his eye. He and Ethel Streets were married. Unable to endure the rigors of country life, though she spent much time with her family in Omaha. After the birth of their daughter, her health deteriorated and she died when Barbara was 2. Bert and his second wife, Luella Larsen, operated the ranch together until he died. Bert's intellectual pursuits ranged from the ridiculous to the sublime. He loved a good joke. His interest in history and his grasp of world events gave him an edge in conversations. Staples Ranch at the time hosted luminaries, national and international. Bert joined their discussions as a respected equal. While firm in his convictions, he had a knack of defending his position and still projecting his respect for his opponent's right to disagree. This talent acted as a soothing influence on the stormy decisions of the many public boards and commissions he agreed to serve. And let's see, but he faced a prolonged terminal illness, often with humor and certainly with courage. died in 1957, and that was into the Staples Ranch. Now, that's kind of what I have on Lou Larsen and Bert Staples, really. But if everybody wants to look at those postcards, this is all the postcards we could find. I don't know how many he made, but I'm sure there's a lot more of them out there. If anybody ever runs across those, and they're kind of distinctive. He never put his name on there per se, but there's always writing at the bottom. And some of them did have the name, and some of them didn't. But he always wrote at the bottom the view that you were looking at. And we've got two of the ones that, the one picture that's on the front of our history book, that's one of his photographs taken out of the top of the tree over here. And there's another one there, and then another one that's his cabin. Anybody got any questions or comments? Yeah.
Where exactly of South Piney was his cabin?
The cabin, I think, I'm not positive for sure, but my brother thought he found another one of those stone forts up there a few years ago, and I think he found the old cabin site. I think when you go up where the washout took place, I think it's right up that hill from that. It looks, there's a picture of it there, and it's either there or it's up kind of where above the old cable car, up the top of that hill. It's one of those two places, but I can't tell for sure. But his homestead, like they sat right against the Forest Service. Yes?
George, on the Baudry place, up at the top of Glacier Creek,
Uh-huh.
it sits on top of the hill and then drops off into the creek.
Right.
behind it. If you go down behind there, Baudry's permission, there's an old water wheel.
That's the old sawmill.
Well, there was also a 32-volt generator.
Oh, there was?
Yes.
Oh.
And Staples had an electrical system going to all of the cabins.
He did, yes.
And you remember the old 32-volt DC system?
Yeah.
He took a 32-volt DC generator and hooked onto that water wheel.
All right.
And right behind my cabin up there is one of the old poles with an insulator on it.
Yeah.
And I also found one of the insulators totally intact, buried on my place.
Yeah.
And I'm told by some of the old timers that stayed in Staples Ranch that it would drive you nuts that they had a single bulb hanging down from the ceiling. And of course, the water wheel was handmade and was not perfect. And the flow of the creek would change too. So with a 32-volt DC generator, you don't get a smoothing of the current. So the current sits there and goes up and down, and the lights in the cabins would go up and down and up and down.
Yeah.
And I'm told that reading by them was really
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, I had heard that before, that he had his own system because the electricity didn't go up that far when he first started.
Right.
But there's also, there's the old sawmill's still up in that area too. I thought that's what you're referring to. 'Cause,
Well, I don't know if that's originally the sawmill, but I know for sure that was the water wheel they used for the electric.
yeah. Well,
And
it
it's
would-
still there, still fairly intact.
Is that the one at Padres?
Yes.
Oh.
Padre will give you permission to look at it if it's all ahead of time.
Yeah.
Of course,
Oh, yeah, you should go see it.
Oh, yeah.
It's really quite a sight.
Right.
And like I say, 10 foot across the creek behind my cabin is this pole sticking up there with insulators on it. And that was one of the original, that's on not Al's place, but the guy next to me in California. Winterly.
Winterlings, yeah.
Yeah. His uncle was the winterling that was involved in the Johnson County War. By the
Oh,
way.
yeah.
The one that didn't show up.
Well,
There wasn't.
yeah. Did you have a question
Oh,
too?
where's the Bighorn Reservoir?
Oh, that's above Red Grave.
Oh,
There's a few reservoirs up there.
Yeah.
And that's where, when he left this country, that's where he went to next. And he finished out the rest of his life wandering those mountains. up there.
yeah, okay.
He,
It's near Sparrow.
huh?
It's
Yeah,
near Sparrow.
right, yeah, Yeah, and like I said, he loved those mountains and just spent all his time on the mountains. And there's a couple of pictures of him there. One of them he's holding a bobcat and another one there, but he lived for the outdoors.
George, where were you able to find those biographies?
From my mother.
Of course.
That daughter had sent them. When did she send them to you? Recently or a long time ago?
No, when we were doing tales of
Oh, okay.
Oh.
mostly upstate.
Yeah,
That would be in 80.
yeah. Because there's an article on Bert Staples in this book. Well, that's, oh, yes.
What is the Staples Ranch now?
Well, it's several dwellings there. The Dude Ranch is long gone, but there's quite a few dwellings up there.
Yeah, right. Part of my house, or my 2 acres is on the old Stable Ranch.
I think that's some of the ones he sold off the early years, I think, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I found all kinds of wagon and harness.
Did you? Oh,
Buried
yeah.
on the property.
Well, probably later than.
So I wondered if it wasn't part of he apparently had a blacksmith shop.
He probably did.
And there were scraps of iron and big wheel bearing off a wagon, all kinds of stuff. Pieces and parts of harness all over the place around the cabin.
George, do you have any idea if any of these buildings in this one are still?
Oh, still here? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, yeah. A couple of them that are, I know they're here. I've been in them. This is the Harvey's house. Yeah.
Oh, Sue Harvey, okay.
Yeah, this is still there. They still in the same, always been, it's been in the family for 100 years, I think. And then this is, this little cabin, what's her name? There's there the gal, right next to Milo's. The little cabin.
Jane.
Jane.
Yeah, Jane, I remember laughing. But anyway, yeah, that cabin's still there. It's been remodeled a little bit, but it's sided with something else now, but the original log cabin is still there. And we were looking for some of these others. Of course, the old schoolhouse is still around. It's not where it was in this picture. And,
Where is it in the picture?
well, in the picture, it's where the new schoolhouse is, but it was
Oh.
moved, so now it sits over on the corner there when you hit the Wagon Box Road.
Across the street.
Yeah. But the other houses, I don't recognize. Those two for sure are absolutely still here. The Harvey house is still excellent shape.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, if you guys want to look at them pictures, look them over. Any more questions?
Thank you.
Okay, look around and that'll, whoop, yes.
The pictures of the falls, where are those?
The North Piney Falls.
Those are the North Plain Falls? Really?
Some of them are. Some of them I'm not positive. I haven't been up North Piney Falls in about 25 years. They may be the falls up there, but I know the one is the North Piney. The one is absolutely the North Piney Falls.
Is that on Gouge's place then?
Yeah, you're right. It is on, yeah, that property that Nelgie picked up. That used to be a main dude trail going up there, even though it was on, when I was a kid, we used to go up South Piney on the dude trail, go to Penrose and cross over to North Piney and then come back down that way. It was a nice, big, wide trail. And that was when Crawford was still owned it, Carl Crawford.
What was in the caches that you found?
He said there in the one he found, there was found some old snelled hooks, a fishing pole, some flies. What else was it, Dick?
Well, every one of the cases that I ever saw, the first thing you notice, you have at least a case of 22 long rifles, cartridges, and fish hooks, and the first one we found at Twin Lakes, there were several fishing poles in it of various kinds. The fishing pole that intrigued me most was a collapsible steel pole that the line went up the center inside the collapsible so that you could cast it in willows without your line getting tangled. And I took that and used it for a long time. Finally one day, a horse I was riding in the mountains went down, I had it in a rifle scabbard, and the horse went down with me under the horse, and I didn't get hurt, the fishing pole got destroyed. But he had flour in lard cans, lard buckets. You know how the old-fashioned lard bucket had a lid that went down tight? You always had extra flour in those so the weevil couldn't get into it. He always had extra cans of lard, and they were well sealed. Sometimes a can of lard was in another larger can with that same locking lid. He had a knife or two.
Now, were those knives,
And any of the ones that my brother and I had found, there were never any guns, but there was always ammunition. And he always had some extra blankets, and they were in square cans, about this square, stood about that high with a round hole in the center, and that lid snapped on tight, and he had those blankets nice clean, put in there very neatly, and that's sealed. Everything was sealed so the chipmunks or anything else couldn't get at it. And that flour that was sealed up in those cans was still good.
How did you know it was his stuff?
Well, because his name.
Oh, it's named.
There were papers in there and so on. It was definitely his.
Yeah.
Now that cabin at Twin Lakes even had a door with some window glass in it. Apparently he had built that cabin with the residual of the tar paper shacks that were built in the 1930s when the first city of Sheridan Twin Lakes Reservoir was built, because people lived up there all one of the winters in the 1930s. And apparently that cabin was built out of the residual of some of those, because it was mostly plywood and 2x4s. It was backed up against a solid rock, so one side of it was a solid rock that stood about 9 or 10 feet high. The cabin, of course, was shorter. It had a pitched roof, and it had one window with glass in it, and the door that had 4 panes of glass in it. Later, when the city of Sheridan built the second reservoir at Twin Lakes, a fire got out and it burned that cabin, what was left of it, down. Gene Griffith, who was a barber in Sheridan for many, many years, had worked for my brother Orr and I for 5 years before he became a barber, and he was a great fisherman, and he told me that after that fire that burned that cabin, he went back and there was nothing left except the doorknob and some of the hardware from the door and a window catch. That was about all that was left of the fire. The cache that we found at the Bighorn Reservoir was within 100 yards of the cabin that used to be the Bighorn Reservoir, and it was all underground in a sand formation, and he had a big sheet of metal over it, and it covered it with branches and pine needles and cones, and I don't know how many years it had stood there. And somehow the wind had blown it off so that just one little corner of a sheet of metal, heavy metal, that was covered. This thing was just a pit in the ground. And it was in such a formation that water never ever gotten into it from below, and the sheet of metal had kept it off on top. And the sheet of metal was only on a very gentle slope, and it didn't have as many things in it as the one at Twin Lakes, but it still had ammunition and flour. And that one had a log saw, a one-man log saw, about 4 feet long, and carved in the handle was J-O-W. And that's the initials of my maternal grandfather. And Larsen, so my older brother Orr told me that J.O. Willits had told him that Larsen had been employed to use black powder for my grandfather when my grandfather and the other neighbors built the Martin Reservoir, and later in 1919, when my grandfather built the Willits Reservoir. And both those reservoirs are on the same drainage as the Bighorn Reservoir. But he was, to fill the Willits Reservoir, they had to build a ditch. The reservoir drains onto the drainage into East Fork Big Goose, but the water to fill the Willits Reservoir comes from the West Fork of Little Goose, so there had to be a diversion ditch built, and there was a lot of blasting on it, and that's where Larsen worked for J.O. Willits, apparently. Now, J.O. Willits, I remember a lot of things J.O. Willits told me, but he never told me about that. But my brother Orr says that Orr was 5 years older than I. He said that J.O. Willits had told him about Larsen being very handy with black powder and other explosives. And there's several places on that little diversion ditch from Little Goose to the reservoir that showed signs of hand drilling and blasting. Also in that cache at the Bighorn Reservoir, there were several of these granite dishes, a metal plate that was covered with baked on, there's a name for it, I can't think what it is.
Oh, enamel.
Yeah, enamelware.
Enamelware.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And J.O. Willits had a quantity of those dishes over his years when he had the horse camp on the Rosebud and later at the reservoir and so on. And there were several of those dishes there
In the cache. Huh.
in that cache. Edward Schultz told me later that he'd found one of Larsen's caches near the Bishop Mine. I've never been to the Bishop Mine and I know nothing about it. But my brother Orr and I owned an airplane for a good many years, and Orr just loved to fly the mountains. And one time he came home and he says, I think I found another Larsen cache, and it's right straight up from the picnic ground in Little Goose Canyon. If you're going up the mountain, it'd be a little to the left of straight south from there. And later,
Would that be along Turkey Creek, Vic?
What?
Would that be along Turkey Creek? That stretch?
Where Orr described where it was, I don't know what, I think it would drain back into Piney, but I never saw it, so I can't answer your question. But later, Chuck Story, you see, my brother Orr's wife was Marguerite Story, and she was the second generation of the Story that your community is named after. And her brother, Chuck Story, was a great fisherman, and he used to camp, or not camp, he'd just go up and park in that Little Goose Canyon parking ground and just go right straight up the face of that mountain and fish over on the headwaters of Piney Creek. And you'd go up and back in one fish and come back in one day in the summertime, long days. And he told Orr and I that he had seen what Orr had seen from the airplane. Now I know I assume that cache burned when that forest fire was on that ridge, and that would have been in mid or early 1960s when that forest fire was there. And I assume that cache burned on that forest fire.
There may be some more of them up there somewhere, though. There may be some up here even that,
Well, there may be.
yeah. Cause that guy, he sure,
But he was very ingenious
yeah.
on how to keep flour and keep the
Yeah.
weevil out of it.
They keep it dry.
Well, maybe go ahead and look them pictures over, buddy, and, I don't know, what's our discussion on next month?
It's, not next month, but the month after.
Month after.
The property up by the Staples.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, that's right, yeah. Okay.
What was it?
It's on the property up by the Staples place.
Thank you very much, George.
Okay, you're welcome.
Cookies and
I'm
coffee.
glad Vic showed up and gave us a little more insight into this Lou Larsen. They come,
And they used to go to the UM and they went to Geyers and everybody's place to thrash.
That Charlie Scott, he was there with Grandpa, Charlie Scott.
That's Harold's dad.
Yeah, he was married to my dad's cousin Al.
Right. I remember that.
Oh, yeah, he was too.
They talked about, they homesteaded there, Savage and first, and Charlie Scott, and then they came to this country.
Right.
Charlie Scott was the one that had the pretty big workhorse stud and they got over there and everybody's married.
Great big family guy. Charlie was.
This photo here was taken somewhere on North Piney
Yep.
at,
on my mother's stock. My dad's stock.
Tunis Clark. When Tunis Clark lived in Story in the 50s, I would guess, the early 50s. Well, that's,
Look at that ticket.
when that picture was taken, and of course,
Yeah, he was way,
yeah.
What is this? Listing of people's names.
That's out when they had the 50th anniversary. Well, that's people that say I got the original piece at home. but I didn't bring it.
Well, now we know what it is.
See, now this Charlie Law here, and his wife from Oregon City, Oregon, they built a door in the wagon box in 1908.
But Piney Inn was the name of the wagon box, right?
Yes, it
Okay,
was,
so
Yeah.
you said it was built by John Buckingham.
yeah.
It was.
Yeah.
Charlie Law
I'm
was the
sorry.
owner, John Buckingham did the work.
Yeah.
Oh, Law was the owner and Buckingham did the work, okay.
Now this is my Uncle Joe Smith that was born before the turn of the century, and you can see that was in 1979.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is the same place. I'm from Manitowoc, Wisconsin.
I would say that it would be.
Manitowoc is the way it was spelled.
Is that the right spelling? or
No,
not?
it's not right, if that's the same place.
Now, my mother was a school teacher, so I'm not going to say whether it's right or wrong.
Well, it might be a different town, too.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard tell of a historian from the East Coast by the name of
Where I'm
Steve
from,
Smith?
it's Manitowoc.
No, I haven't.
It's an Indian name.
I met Steve probably
Yeah, I didn't know. I like I said, it
30
might be
years
an
ago now.